Okay.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's 5:33. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda? Seeing none. It looks like the only member of the public we have is in the central office. Hi, Paul. Do you have anything you wanted to address that's not on the agenda? Nope. Okay. Moving right along. The meeting minutes, our last meeting was June 15th. The minutes are in the packet. I would look for a motion to approve them.
I'll second.
Okay, Renee, Gina. I only had one kind of a grammar note. Andrea, item on the minutes 5.5, the third to last line, no decision has to be in the immediate future, not immediately future. But other than that, everything else was good. All those in favor of approving the minutes? Good, good. Gina, you good? Good, all right. Moving right along, item 5.1, budget development calendar. So this is something that Lisa usually puts out every year. It kind of gives us a guideline of how the budget development process goes. Lisa, I don't know if you want to kind of just give a brief summary.
Sure. Yeah, it's the outline that helps the board to understand, and the administrators, it helps us to know where we're at, what's coming next, and when the board can expect certain types of information. So yeah, we walk through this every year. Around this time, it feels early, but I think it's, in September, we'll start scheduling meetings to, okay, hang, someone's trying to join. Okay, there we go. So yeah, as early as September, we'll start scheduling, Chris and I will schedule meetings with the administrators.
Okay. Any questions on that? Go ahead, Chris.
Lisa, is anything new on this calendar than it has been before, or it's the same as you guys have been doing for a while?
It's the same. It changed briefly, just a little bit because of, when we merged and consolidated, but for the most part, it's the same.
Okay, great. Because I noticed that there's on the other side of it, it's the budgeting policy. So I didn't know if there was anything new along those lines that I should know about or anything like that.
No, I just wanted to share the budgeting policy. I do think that the policy committee might want to revisit this because I noticed some just changes that probably should take place when it talks about the BUUSD and its member districts. I think that was language that was in there before when it was the Barry Supervisory Union. So we'll want to take that out.
So we would just keep the BUUSD and not the member districts part.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes,
the BUUSD consisting of, and then list the schools.
Yep.
And I think that was it.
Okay. Thank you for pointing that out. That's helpful.
You're welcome.
Any other questions about this? No? Okay. I do see as far as August, it says the administration would appreciate feedback on parameters and setting, perhaps a target percentage as far as the FY23 budget. I'm going to kind of defer that to the full board, and I'm guessing this will be presented at the next meeting there. So something that we're not necessarily going to discuss right now, but I did see that was there.
And we do understand that it's early on in the process, and so certainly the board probably won't be able to share their target, at this point. But it helps also to know that maybe it should be a discussion soon.
Right. Yeah, I think that's probably helpful. I know in the past we've always kind of come up with a percentage, but it's been further into the budget process and after administrators have kind of already given all their their wish lists.
Exactly.
All right, moving all right along. Item 5.2 is an update on summer projects. In your packet, you will notice the list. I mean, most of this has been board approved, so I don't know if we're getting updates on what's been done or the items that are coming, for example, wood chips and whatnot.
Yeah, Jamie and I just like to share this throughout the summer, just to give you a sense of what projects are going on. There's typically quite a lot going on through the summer, and just to update you and keep you in the loop. We are working on the wood chip and transportation still, but those are the only things really outstanding in terms of RFPs. So just an update.
Okay. And it looks like the inspection for certificate of occupancy has been scheduled for the C building. Jamie, when is that?
I'm told mid to late of next week.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They
great.
had hoped to do it last Friday, but they weren't quite ready. They had a couple hiccups with the fire alarm system. Some parts came in wrong, so that's been corrected. Now they're just working with the inspector's office to schedule that.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Any questions about this? Seeing none. All right, item 5.3, use of anticipated funds. So you'll see in the packet, there was the recommendation that we received at the last school board meeting about the superintendent's recommendation for our surplus funds, which is it a little bit higher than the 2.9 now? Like 3.2?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we had asked Lisa to get a legal opinion on what can be done with the funds, so that she has also included. Do we want to go through this? Chris had recommended we move 1.1 into the capital projects fund. I had asked Jamie here to kind of give a list of priorities. It looks like he's given a pretty big one. Jamie, do you want to talk about the sprinkler system?
Sure. So first, I'm going to start off by saying I've never been a part of a problem of having surplus money. So I'm really excited that we have these funds to go towards a large project that would have been very, very hard to to finance and fund. So a sprinkler project, and start by saying there's nothing exciting about a sprinkler project other than knowing that we're protecting our property and protecting our people. All of our school buildings are fully sprinkled with the exception of Spalding High School. So that's why I've made that recommendation. I think a few of us already have signed on saying this is a worthy project. So back in 2016, after several meetings with the fire prevention office and local fire marshals, it was determined that we were on course to install a sprinkler system in Spalding High School. At the time, we started with the lower level heavy trade shops of the Career Center, just because of the nature of what they do, with automotive equipment, welding and wood and cutting and saws and all that. It was determined that was the best place to start. So we did. And I can refer to this map if those of you that have that little color-coded map. But essentially, and for those of you that may not have it, what we did was from the building trade shop leading up towards just short of the auditorium of the high school, all those areas we sprinkled during 2016. And as well as that, the area that was already fully sprinkled was the, I'm going to call it the new gymnasium, but the 2-court gymnasium. When that was built somewhere in 95, that was fully sprinkled, as well as all the adjoining locker rooms, some classrooms in that adjacent area. So for those of you that have the map, the area that has kind of like the red hash marks drawn through those areas, that area, as well as the kind of the light yellow colored shaded area, those are the 2 areas that are fully sprinkled. Actually, as well as the stage of the auditorium is sprinkled as well. But all the other areas of the building that you see shaded in different colors is not sprinkled. We had several meetings with the Vermont Prevention Fire Office and local and state fire marshals, and we came to this agreement with the state that we had to devise a plan to, phase in a sprinkler system for the building. We fully intended to do that when we did that first phase of the trade shops. But then the next year, like many years, we had to trim our budget, so much that we just did not have the funds to start the next phase of sprinkling the building. Then the next year turned into another year to another year, and and now here we are with COVID, and it just hasn't happened yet. So we kind of fast forward to where we are now, and we have this large surplus. So when I got approached, by Lisa and Chris, and we have these funds, and when I received the email from your last month's meeting saying that $1 million or $1 million plus funds was going to be earmarked for facilities, my mind went straight to the sprinkler system. It's a large expense that is going to be very, very hard to finance, in a regular operating budget. It will make the building, fully sprinkled. It will make it as safe as all of our other buildings. I don't really know what else to say than it's not an exciting project, but it's a necessary project, and it'll keep our building safe and keep our people safe.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions about that? Chris, is that you or is that Paul? Go ahead, Paul.
Well, I had a quick comment that I just wanted to add to Jamie's thing, and then we can turn over to Paul. Maybe what we should do as well, Sarah, is talk about, before I just add on to what Jamie said, just talk about how public comment is going to work for the meeting. Maybe review that if we're seeing questions. I just want to make sure that was all clear for everybody. But one of the things that is also coming up, we have, most of you are aware that we are planning a community forum on August 18th to talk about the use of ESSER 3 funds. And one of the potential things that's being discussed is obviously ventilation upgrades in the buildings, particularly Barry City and Spalding. And Jamie, if I'm correct, it would certainly make sense while doing some of that work to tie it into some of this sprinkler upgrade work as well, because this isn't something that's just going to be done in a couple months. This is a long-term big project. Am I correct in saying that? Okay, just wanted to put that out to everybody. Thank you.
Okay. As far as public comment goes, it looks like we've only got a couple of members of the public here, but to stay consistent with what we've been doing in board meetings, give everybody, 2 minutes to speak and say their piece, and we'll go from there. I'll let Paul go first.
First of all, to that very point, I always thought that the committee structures would allow places where you could have conversations to resolve issues and resolve problems. I have really about 6 questions here, and if 2 minutes is not the venue for that, and it's all germane to your agenda, then maybe I need to take it into a different kind of medium or circus. But dealing with the sprinkler system, we were given a waiver during previous years for not having to have a sprinkler system. I sat in as chair of the high school board for that, and Jamie, I know you were there. along with Giuliano and Dave Lacrosse, and there was Sponable himself with his assistant. And it was Dave Delcor who actually brought the full document. And I know that Tina Gilbert has that entire document on file upstairs in this building. This was not something that would be required of us for that part of the facilities unless we altered and changed the entire building. Now, putting in ventilation was not in that conscript because we did ask about that. So if you're thinking that all of a sudden opens a door for you, I don't believe it does. It was literally physical changes to the building. At that time, as Jamie had previously said, monies are always tight. And at that time, I think we were looking at about $600,000 thereabouts to do that. Now we're looking at something that I believe is near $800,000. There are a lot of other things that could happen in that high school where these monies could really go if you're going to spend that kind of money. But we're not required to put that sprinkler system in. We are grandfathered for that. There's strong documentation on this point. I'll reserve my time for the other questions I have.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So can I just ask a clarifying to understand? My understanding is new construction of public schools and commercial buildings need to be sprinkled. And what Paul is saying is that we've been granted a waiver for the existing building as long as there's no structural changes. Is that right?
That is correct, because there was a lot of things that were done to this building at that particular time. I can't recall the date, but it's either in the 80s or 90s or something like that when there was additions put onto Spalding High School. And at that time, the state fire marshal state had granted us a waiver when that was done. It was only by research of Dave Delcor that document came into full light, and it made the press repeatedly. And we were told we did not need to have it at the time.
This was in the 80s? I'm sorry, is that what you said?
I'm not really sure of the time, Sarah.
Okay.
I know that the document itself would be self-explanatory.
Okay. Okay.
Can I just, sorry.
Yep, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So during the phase 1 process for the sprinkler system, I sat in on a couple different meetings with a state fire marshal and our local fire division. And it was quite clear to me that we were going to have to eventually install a sprinkler system. So I think it's worth, digging into and making sure that we have all the most recent and accurate information.
Okay. Josh Howard, you have a comment or, sorry, Jamie, did you have something? Sorry, Josh.
So to add to what Lisa said and what Paul said, there is a waiver based on the age of the building and existing building codes at the time, what is required, what is not required as far as sprinklering. We added particular fire doors, additional fire doors throughout the building, but as well, much as like what Lisa said as well, there was a very strong verse meeting with state fire officials that you will at some point in the very near future be required / mandated to put a sprinkler system into this building. As well, let's just go down that road and say we decide not to put a sprinkler system in. We are then, our hands are tied to any additions, any alterations of any kind to the building. As soon as you do anything, any propose it, that's going to trigger you then sprinkling in the building at that point. So pound wise, penny foolish, we don't put a sprinkler system in for whatever host of reasons, whatever ones you want to choose. We're tied. We're tied to doing any kind of alterations, expansions of any kind. But again, I'll refer back to what Lisa's referring to, is that meeting with the state fire marshal and local fire marshals. You will put in a sprinkler system at some point, and we have that strong agreement with them that we are going to do this in a phased process. And they understood that, budgets were tight and they're willing to work with us. So they've been quite lenient, quite fair in their assessment of when and how we're going to do this. again, I'm a very strong, proponent to do this project and be done with it, with the funds that we have. This chance is probably never going to come again.
To be honest, I almost hope not. But I understand what you're saying, and I kind of agree. Just because we have a waiver doesn't necessarily mean it's the prudent thing to do. The codes are updated and the way they are for safety issues. So just because we have the waiver doesn't necessarily mean we should use it. Josh, Howard, I'm sorry, you can go ahead.
Okay. As far as the sprinkler system, I'm not going to debate whether you need one or not. What I am going to debate is, we're now at $3.2 million in a surplus, which is crazy. It just keeps growing. I wonder what's going to be next month. Is going to be $4 million. But as far as the expenditures on faculties, we have a capital reserve fund we refuse to use. It's hitting about $700,000 or $800,000 right now. Every single project that this district doesn't, not a one red cent comes out of it. Comes right out of the budget. What I propose is you put the whole surplus in the capital infrastructure budget and funds there, and you use it from year in, year out to catch up on your stuff. No grand wish list stuff or anything like that. No $4 million sports field at Spalding, but keep up on that. Take the stuff out of the budget. You have to get the lower budget at the same time, and it's better than the tax reserve fund, because the tax reserve fund would simply, it's just kicking the can down the road. It's, you guys don't actually struggle to actually make the proper cuts. Hence, we got a $3.2 million surplus. So yeah, just give it all to capital reserve and be done with it. How much is the sprinkler project? Anyway, was that about $1 million? I'm assuming somewhere right around there.
Yeah, it's going to be in that range with inflation. It's going to be in that range. Yes.
Is it all going to get done at the same time, or are you going to bits and pieces?
It'll probably have to be done in a phased project, phased fashion, just because of the size of it and the amount of time we have during the summer to do it. I would suspect it would probably take 2 summers to do it.
Yeah, so the current recommendation was to put 1.1 into the capital reserve budget, so that would all get spent on a sprinkler. So you'd be back down to $700,000 in the infrastructure budget, which you won't use because I keep hearing, oh, what if something big comes up? What if something big comes up? Well, if you put, like I said, if you bring up the $4 million, you use one, you still got $3 million sitting there, and you can actually lower the budget at the same time while increasing it up to $1 per square foot as far as what you're contributing to it, and actually keep a steady pace and have the reserve fund sitting there for if a boiler does decide to go all of a sudden, which that's a weird argument, because the way I look at it is if a boiler does go, they don't have this in the back room at FW Webb. This could take months to get. These are not small boilers. You could definitely put up a boat, but if that were to happen, you got the money sitting there, and it's a long-term relief for everybody, because it's going to take like a couple $1 million out of the budget every year. You don't have to touch.
Okay, thank you. Josh, I just want to clarify. So what you're saying is that you would propose moving all of the surplus funds into the capital reserve fund and then not budgeting for capital expenditures and repairs and maintenance throughout the year?
Right. I mean, like for instance, like the roof project, $200,000 came out of the budget rather than capital reserve. If you had $4 million sitting there, why would it come out of the budget? Take it out of capital reserve instead. And yet at the same time, just took $200,000 off the budget. And that's just one project of many. I'm not talking about your routine maintenance. I'm talking about your, roofs and auditoriums and whatever, because it adds up to quite a bit. And then at the same time, you can actually go from 75 cents a square foot up to $1 a square foot and still lower the budget at the same time while maintaining a capital reserve infrastructure budget sitting right there. And like I said, it's a long-term plan to actually cut the budget.
Okay. I just want to make, and this just might be accounting distinctions, but I'm an accountant. So Lisa, if you can confirm right now, our capital reserve fund is only about 300,000, not 7 or 8.
Right.
Okay. And
our FY20 audit had a reported 292,549.
Okay. And we were expecting to have to tap into that a little bit for the roof project for Berry City, correct?
We did not.
Oh, okay. We did not. But what happens when we budget the 75 cents or $1 per square foot for the buildings, that does not actually go into that reserve fund. And like I said, this might just be an accounting distinction, but it's not actually moving to that fund. It's staying in the general fund and it's being spent from our general budget. So I just want to clarify that, for the record, Josh, we don't have 700,000 or 800,000 in that budget, in that fund.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought, because I asked before, and he said there was about $300,000 in there, not including what came out of this new budget this passed. But is that incorrect? Just correct me.
Right. So the money that's in the budget, the year-to-year budget, it doesn't actually get moved to that fund. It gets used, throughout the year and spent on capital or maintenance and repairs and that sort of thing to keep up the buildings. But it doesn't actually move into that fund. Meaning, if Jamie doesn't spend all the money that's budgeted, it doesn't necessarily move into that fund, and it's not left over.
Well, I think my argument still stands as far as just put the $4 million or the $3.2 million right into the capital reserve and be done with it, and just start using that. And like I said, the substance is still there. Bring it up to $1 a square foot instead of 75, or even $1.10, and feed it a little bit better. And you can actually afford things and actually have that reserve fund sitting there for the big stuff that might come up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments from my committee members or Chris and/or Paul?
I have, as I said, I had about 4 or 5 questions. We already dove into one of them. First of all, I have a question, and this may be even a Lisa question. First of all, I will now say to you clearly that I don't agree with the full Giuliani opinion. I think you need to get another opinion here. And I've talked to a number of other people about what you do with surpluses, which end at a particular booked time. Our fiscal year ended on June 30th, and we're into another fiscal year. My first question is, how do you book future expenses, which is what you're planning right now, back into a prior year? The second question to go with that, just so I don't waste a lot of everybody's time, the second question I have is, how do you allocate those surplus funds that have not fully gone through an audit process? My next question is, dealing with the opinion itself, how do you reconcile? And when I read this opinion, the second part that I looked at was that the magnitude is determined by an audit. What does that mean in order to, as was just brought to our attention, you just moved from 2.9 to 3.2. We don't know what that moving amount is. I'm not saying that the money shouldn't be allocated for various different things, but I'm wondering if it is within the board's purview to be the ones doing this, since the booking of last year has ended on June 30th. And then I'll give you one more question to go with this. Why should we be afraid to put this before the voters to get them to sanction and approve what it is you're proposing, and bring that to the fore and clear up any of the legal issues that I see here? I've been doing this for about 40 years. And I have to tell you, I've not seen this type of scenario based upon when an audit is done. And I throw a poser question at you. If our books closed on June 30th and the audit was completed on, say, July 3rd, what would the discussion be right now?
So I guess I'll start with your first question, and that was, how do you spend money and book it back to a prior year? So from one year to the next, your fund balance rolls forward. So the surplus this year is merely you had more income than you had expenses.
Lisa, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to clarify, because we've been talking about funds. You're talking about the general fund.
The general fund, correct. So to answer Paul's question, the money is sitting in the general fund. Any surplus funds are sitting in your general fund. The board has the authority to assign those funds to certain things. So, and I had a second opinion from another attorney, and I've spoken with our auditor. And so when we look at when the audit is complete, and none of these things are happening today, and I don't think anybody has said we're afraid or we're not bringing this to the voters. But what I think is important is that we do have a substantial surplus, and we haven't ever had a surplus like this. And Paul, I know you've been doing this for a lot of years. Have you ever seen anything like this? It's unprecedented. And it's because we had $2 million in COVID relief funds drop into our lap. And I think so that's why we have a surplus, and I will never project more than I think we're going to have at the end of the year. So yes, I'm very conservative. I started, I believe, in January saying we're going to have a substantial surplus. And then I report from that point on every month. And yeah, it looked a little better every month because we never even received funding from those, when in March 2020, when, we were hit with COVID-19, we were told, go ahead, do what you need to do because the agency, the federal government, they're going to provide you with the money that you need. Go buy your masks, go buy, your cleaning supplies, do whatever you have to. But the agency also got this money dropped on them, and they didn't know when they were going to receive the money, when we were going to receive the money. So, I mean, it was March before we actually were reimbursed.
Just a quick response to that, Lisa. And I'm not against, by the by, spending money for things that, with our facilities committees that we had at the high school for years, the only way we were able to upgrade the school was by setting aside dedicated funds each year as part of our budgetary process. The problem I'm having right now is this. It's very simple. And I still think that the opinion is not wholly correct, but that's my thought. My problem is that you're trying to create things to spend money that came out of last year on something moving ahead. That's a bad perception point. It was never in the budget for last year to do a sprinkler system, i.e. as an example. Mm-hmm. And I know that, we have the opportunity to utilize these funds for various purposes. Mm-hmm. My concern is, beyond public perception, is are we 100% sure that the books are still open for that year to spend that balance you say does exist? That's my concern.
The board can assign the fund balance to capital improvement. And so in an open meeting, the board can say, we want to take $1 million of what we know is going to be a fund balance and assign it, because it would be then assigned. If there was just $3 million sitting in our general fund, it would be categorized as an unassigned fund balance. But what will happen is if the board chooses to assign $1 million, then the audit will reflect that, and it will say, you have 2 million unassigned, you have 1 million assigned for a capital project. And if doing so, we can move more quickly. There's a lot involved in a project the size of a new sprinkler, and then potentially we're going to be also working on a new, improvements to the HVAC system, ventilation improvements. So there's a lot of work to be done, and it doesn't make sense to sit and wait for, the voters in March to say, sure, move the money to a capital improvement fund. But certainly that's the board's decision, and there are options.
I just want to make sure that's the correct decision. And if somebody wants to put their John Hancock and you have several opinions and they all say the same thing, and that becomes something that statutorily is legit for us to do, mm-hmm. That's fine. I have no problem with that. And if you can assign something going into a prior year and call it an improvements project or however else you want to distribute these monies, I'm not arguing about the expense of it. I'm arguing about the process that gets us there, and whether or not you could have a special meeting to have voters weigh in on this. I mean, there's always that too. You don't have to wait till March. But I just want to make sure the process is correct, because I've never seen it quite that way before. Thank you.
Okay. Josh, you had another question or a comment?
I do. Actually, Paul hit at the end there saying that you don't have to wait till March for an election is the first thing. But one comment I had is being that we have a $3.2 million surplus. We got $2 million from COVID. Where did the other $1.2 million come from? It just seems, I mean, that's, and I guess the question is, so we all know, what was the dollar amount of the budget increase last year? What were we talking about here? I mean, it seems like maybe I was right. We didn't need one.
So if you have the finance packet, I have I've summarized, and at the end I've given narratives. You know, there were several areas that I'm just looking at Berrytown's let's see, supply line. You know, their students were not in the building full time. There was a period when no one was in the building, and staffing shortages. You know, we were down maybe 15 paraeducators. So I think, you know, positions that were budgeted, we moved those positions to the COVID funding. So, you know, there's the savings.
There were no savings last year. The budget went up again. That's just how it went.
I guess I meant that's why there's a surplus. And again, you can look at the narrative to see, you know, in a kindergarten classroom there was a reduction in a kindergarten classroom. There were students who were receiving education virtually. So there were some reductions in the number of classes throughout. So
I guess my suggestion would be is if maybe we have a public forum on the surplus money, come up and maybe have people survey, not the one that's online, because for some reason that isn't working. I tried that yesterday, the ESSER fund one. It didn't take my stuff at all. But, you know, come with some good ideas, put it on a ballot and have people choose. And simple as that. Like, and you don't have to wait till March. You can do that in 30 days. No problem.
thank you.
Chris or Paul?
I just wanted to reiterate what Lisa said. It was this is an issue much like when we look at state testing scores for this past year. In terms of finance as well, it was such an extraordinary year where it was so hard to anticipate what we were going to be looking at with the schools shut down as they were, with the staffing issues we had. This is not unique to BUUSD. This is what many districts were dealing with. Just not being able to fill positions and having other unexpected contingencies come up just due to the very nature of COVID. So it made it very hard, therefore, to forecast. That's what happened. I just want to reiterate what Lisa said.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments about this part? Renee, Chris, anything? No? Okay. Well, I'm going to stay on the same topic because in addition to moving 1.1 million to the capital projects fund, it was also recommended that we pay off the current expense note from the SEA building and move funds to tax stabilization. But I just wanted to, Lisa, to kind of reiterate for everybody what the current expense note is and what that payoff means.
Okay, so the current expense note is a line of credit, and that's because voters approved the C building. They have approved us buying the property, building the school, and we had a budget projection from our architect of 2.75 million. So once that was approved, we were able to start the bidding process. It took some time. And in the middle of all of that, COVID happened, and the budget came in at 3.75. So we were, in the middle of all of this, and we, the board approved a current expense note. And that was because while we had a budget of 3.75, we didn't necessarily know that was what it would cost. And so we went to a bank. We checked several interest rates. Community Bank had an interest rate of 2.1. We have a current expense note with it's a line of credit. And because the project's in full swing, we're still, it's finishing up. We can just close that current expense note because I haven't tapped into it at all. So it would save, either renewing that expense note, and it would save on interest. And it looks like we are going to have some savings in that budget.
Okay. So, and just to confirm, and I had asked this at the last meeting, we did have it in the current year, the FY22 budget to pay this and the interest payments on it, correct?
Yes.
So that would be a saving in the budget. And I forgot to ask when we were talking about the sprinkler, would there be any kind of additional insurance savings by having the entire build? Do you happen to know, by having the entire building sprinkled, or would it actually make the value go up? So insurance would go up?
I would dare say, there's more value to the building. I don't know if it make our interest. If I had to guess, maybe it will go down a whisker because the building is safer and it's more protected. If I could take just a quick second too, I meant to mention this earlier and I got off target a little bit, just to kind of prove the point a little bit about how important sprinkler systems are. About 6-7 years ago, we actually had a small little fire in one of our science chemistry rooms. I myself, along with Brenda Waterhouse and another employee, went into that area, exploring what was going on, what the issue was. A long story short, some older chemicals that were stored in a storage room, I'm going to call it spontaneously combusted based on their age. Some of the wooden shelving in there actually started to catch fire, created a lot of smoke. We pulled the fire alarm, evacuated the building. Had we not gone in there, maybe explored it, pulled that alarm, if it happened on the weekend, who knows? We could have maybe had a very, very large fire in that building. Had there been a sprinkler system in there, it would have extinguished that, would have made a big mess, but it would have served its purpose and would have put the fire out. So has it ever happened? Yes, it has. And could it have been a whole lot worse? Yes, it could have. So I wanted to share that a little earlier about, it's very important to put this in. It's not the what ifs, it's the what would happen, did it happen, if it happened. So I just think that was important for, for you folks to know that it did happen and it could have been a whole lot worse.
Thank you. And also a good point, and kind of, what I was saying, while we may have a waiver, and until we actually, do some research and learn if that waiver expires or, whatnot, regardless, it is a safety issue that we're looking at trying to correct here. So, any questions about the current expense note recommendation or comments, feelings?
I have a question, and it really is, it's about how we move through these notes. I was one of the 7 board members that voted for the expense note for the overage of the C project. I think there were 2 members that voted against doing this because they felt it needed to go back to the public. We had a warrant article on March 3rd, 2020 that said shall not exceed. And we looked at it and said, well, it was the intent of the voters that we move ahead with the project and prices change and so forth. So we put it into an expense note to would be annualized every year to do that as part of our budget process. Shouldn't this also be another one of those things that should get some sort of voter say on $1 million being used to offset an expense note? It's along the same questions that I had earlier, but I didn't think they needed to be conjoined.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Josh?
Yeah, I mean, real quick. First off, Paul, absolutely. I think it should go to the voters, but I guess the question I would have is how much does it cost in the budget right now for this note? What are we paying towards it every year?
Well, we haven't paid anything because we haven't used any of it. It's a line of credit. And so I have not accessed any of it yet. But it would be 2.1% interest, and you could renew it each year and continue to pay the interest, or you could roll it into a bond or a loan and pay principal. Eventually you would, that would be what you would want to do.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? My committee members are kind of quiet. How are you guys feeling about, so what we're being asked to do tonight is whether or not we agree with the superintendent's recommendation, and do we want to make that recommendation to the board? Do we want to have further discussions? Do you think, what Paul was saying, should we maybe have a community forum to discuss? What are you guys thinking? I got nothing.
I was waiting for Chris to respond. Chris, you want to talk first?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sprinkler system. Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything that I'm hearing tonight that makes me think no, we should not take the superintendent's recommendation either for the sprinkler system, especially for the sprinkler system. And in terms of, do we need a community forum? Yeah, I'm not sure how those decisions get made about what items need community forums and what do not. There are a lot of things that are percolating in a number of committees and in the board meetings. And so I guess that's a general question of how do items rise to that level versus how do we decide we're just going to continue to go through the committee and the board and make decisions that way. So I don't know whether that's a question for Chris or Sonia or, how those decisions get made about that. But I would feel fine bringing this to the board as we're discussing tonight.
Yeah, and I'd like to just follow up with that. We can have waivers all we want, but honestly, from my perspective and what I'm hearing, and what I've heard over the past, 40 years I've been in Barre, I think that putting some of the money into a sprinkler system makes a lot of sense, and because it's about the safety of our kids. And if that fire that Jamie talked about had happened, when kids were in the building, when they were in that room, we got to make sure they're safe. So as far as the sprinkler system, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think following up with what Chris said, as far as, she and I are both completely, we're 3 months in, and there has been a lot of requests in a lot of committees for a lot of forums. And so I'm not really clear myself on what rises to having a forum, what rises to committee discussion, and what's board discussion. And so I think that, at least Chris, I don't want to speak for you, but I'm looking for guidance on how to navigate that and how to do that. And so as far as if this needs to go to a community forum, I don't know, honestly, because we can't bring everything to a forum. And there's a lot of things right now that people want to bring to forums and have huge discussions on. And so I'm trying to find the balance between the two, and I don't really know exactly how to do that. So Sarah, as far as saying forum or not, that I don't know. But I do feel that Jamie's recommendation to get the sprinkler system going makes a lot of sense.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I've been on the board, for 3 months as well, and I did, 3 years prior. I can tell you that all of this is brand new to me too. These are, as they said, unprecedented times. I've never seen a surplus this big. I think, we might have had one that might have reached almost $500,000 once, but probably not even that. I am feeling the same as far as the sprinkler system. I appreciate the work that was done in getting a waiver, because I understand that funds have been hard to come by, but we've got a unique opportunity right now to really kind of catch up and make our building a lot safer. And as far as going to a community forum, I agree. There's a lot of things that the community is taking a lot of part in our meetings, with the virtual atmosphere, which is also unprecedented. I can't remember any board meeting that had this many participants this often. We might have had a one-off meeting when we were going through Act 46, but it's never been so consistent, which is also nice because we're hearing from people in our meetings. We're also hearing from people in emails, comments on the street. As far as the legalities and everything, I'm not a lawyer. I am an accountant. I'm not a CPA. So I'm kind of inclined to, refer to not only our administrators and our business manager, but the legal opinions of lawyers and, our auditors, our CPAs. So while it is a huge surplus we haven't seen before, they're more apt to be able to guide us on that. And so if they're saying that we have the, discretion to do this, I'm kind of inclined to do so. I know we are looking at opening up public forum for spending of ESSER funds. And we've been looking at public forums for things in policy. But I feel like this is something that we can get done, have it not necessarily out of the way, but started planning, especially because, as Jamie mentioned, this, especially the sprinkler project, could be a project that goes on for, over 2 years. If we were to wait, if we were to have a community forum, just even, as we all know, even scheduling something of that could take quite a bit of time. So I'm inclined to say I agree, and I would, refer to the superintendent's recommendation. And if everyone else agrees, that would be what we would recommend to the board, who would decide on it as a whole. Before we take a vote on that, Chris has his hand up, or Paul has his hand up.
I do. I just have a couple quick comments here. Just want to make sure I get a little feedback. This issue of creating community forums and the right way to do that with all the different topics coming up is something that school boards and districts are dealing with all over the state of Vermont right now. The situation that Chris, Sarah, and Renee find themselves in as board members is not unique. This is proven tricky all around the state and how to do it right. As you said, Sarah, and I said earlier, we are federally required by the federal government to get community feedback on the use of these ESSER funds. And that's one of the reasons we're putting together this forum on August 18th, which is a Wednesday evening. And Josh, you said earlier that you had trouble filling out the survey. I'm very sorry to hear that. We've been getting a ton of responses. So I'm not sure what's going on with that. I'll have Josh Allen reach out to you to find out what's going on. I don't know if you or Paul are hearing other people struggling with that. We have gotten a lot of responses though. So I think that, I do know that the board and I have been talking in this last month since I've been on the job about a structure of setting up legit forums where community can give their input on a wide variety of timely topics. This is stuff that we're still working on, but it is in the works. We want this to happen. And the question then goes back to, what are the topics that are going to be brought up? How are those meetings facilitated, where we can really create, places where everybody can have an opportunity to provide their feedback? It's very complex stuff to do well. So I want to be very thoughtful about it and research the best ways to do this to get people in, whether it be in person, virtually, however we do it. So I just kind of want to put that out there to everybody. And it sounds like Paul has a question or comment.
Just a point of clarity on the waiver aspect. That waiver came with the previous construction. It was found. We did not make that request. It was something that was put in when they had done the earlier construction. So I don't want anybody to construe that we had actually asked for a waiver because we didn't have funding. It came about through a fire inspection that they wanted us to put a sprinkler system in. And thanks to Mr. Delcor, he found out that the waiver for the appropriate configuration of the building was still solid. So I think if I were sitting on the board right now, I would say, take a look at what the waiver actually said, see what the timing was about, and make your decision accordingly in that regard. There are an awful lot of other projects that can be done as well at that school. I mean, the list is endless.
Thank you. Josh?
Yeah, I gotta thank you, Sarah, because you hit it right on the head as to why we need a public forum on this. The $3.2 million surplus is unprecedented. It's not common. This is not like a public forum on, how much finger paint should we give kindergartners. It's $3.2 million surplus. And I really think to avoid issues with the budget coming up next March, I think you definitely need to listen to the community, maybe have a forum, get everyone's opinion on it, and then take it from there. And I guess my question is there a deadline as to when you need to figure out what to do with the surplus?
No, there isn't a deadline. It does make sense to start the discussions because we do know there is a substantial amount. And there's, as I said, a lot of work involved in large construction or renovation projects. So it does make sense to make decisions around that.
I would assume for a sprinkler project, it probably wouldn't start till next summer because school's about to start up again. But yeah, I mean, if there's no rush on it, why are we rushing? Why don't we just try to get our minds together, get a public forum together?
Okay, I just want to confirm, Jamie, you had mentioned that if we did this, it might be part of the ventilation system. So I'm assuming that we would be looking to start the conversation sooner, and that's.
That could very well happen if with ESSER funds and if it's with prior approval that we're able to upgrade our ventilation system. And if that was to happen next summer as well, we could very well do the ventilation upgrade as well as the sprinkler work at the same time. Yes, that's a possibility, yes.
Okay, Terry, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I just like a clarifying question, Sarah. I think you said that if we use some of this money from the surplus for the current expense note, that there will be money in the new budget that's already earmarked for that, correct? And if you use some of this money from the surplus, then that will create a savings in the new budget, correct? For the same amount. So my question is, if you do that and push that forward, is that savings essentially the same amount that we're putting in on this end? And if so, does that mean that those dollars now become at the discretion of the board to assign somewhere else?
So I think to clarify that the current expense note, there is we budgeted interest payments on that line of credit. There's no principal in the budget at this point. No decisions had been made about, the current expense note matures in December 2021. So there was no plan at this point on whether it would be renewed or be refunded through a bond or a note.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is if we, for example, put the $1 million towards it or whatever the number is, right? If it's less than that, whatever it is that what is the savings on the other side going to be the same amount? Yes, right? I think it is.
You wouldn't be making principal and interest payments for the next 10 to 15 years, however long the loan was.
Right. And so then in turn, so there's money budgeted in the new budget for that, correct? So that's what the savings would be.
Yes, it would be money budgeted for interest on the.
Would now become savings, right? So that could potentially become a new surplus next year. And my point is, does that then become at the discretion of the board to spend? And hopefully you see that as a problem, right? Because I think as, you know, to Chris's point and Sarah's point a little bit about public forums, you pushed an increase and now you're showing a $3.2 million surplus. There's a lot of us in the community that are losing some faith here that you're looking out for our wallets, right? So that scenario to me paints a picture that, okay, well, we'll use some of this surplus to offset those expenses, but that pushes another savings or surplus next year that you guys can spend however you want that we don't have a say on. That's a problem.
Terry, I just want to clarify what you're asking. So you're saying that by paying off that note, we're taking money that's been approved for a certain purpose by the voters and then using it for our discretion?
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you currently have money in the new budget for this note, correct?
We don't have the full amount. My understanding is that it's meant to be paid over years.
Right. I don't care what the amount is. And I'm just trying to understand too, Sarah. So I don't care what the amount is, but whatever that amount is. So if we take some of this, the surplus that we're sitting on right now and use it for that, the money that you have then budgeted that's sitting in the new budget for that now could potentially become surplus in next year, correct?
Yes, if it's not spent out of the budget.
Exactly. And then so because that's unspent or becomes surplus, that then becomes at the discretion of the board to spend.
To an extent, yes.
Right.
Well, it does or it doesn't, not to an extent. Yes, it does, because that's what you're saying about this $3.2 million, that the board is well within their authority to assign how this gets spent. So yes, they do get to, right? And again, I just think that there's a lot of folks in the community that after you've pushed a increase through and have a big surplus, that there's a lot of people that aren't feeling like you're looking out for us. And that's not a pointed comment. That's just a generalization that I'm hearing from a lot of people that they're like, my goodness, the school's got all this COVID money. Now they got a surplus. They got an increase. Holy smokes. Thank you.
Can I just comment, Terry, that so during the budget development process, the board started out using $200,000 in tax stabilization or general fund toward the budget. And that helps push your tax rate down. And then in the third, I believe, draft, increased that to 300, and we ended up using $600,000 to push your tax rate down. And so I think just to clarify, you know, what a tax stabilization fund is, it's not a slush fund. It's a way for the board to react to the different swings that happen in a given year. So, you know, we could have a significant decrease in our enrollment, and that would cause our equalized pupils to decrease, which would bring your tax rate up. So there's other factors that, you know, weigh in on a tax rate. And so the tax stabilization, the key word is stabilizing. It's keeping your tax rate level, trying anyway. And so, you know, how long can we sustain a $600, you know, payment and support to keep that tax rate down? So that's why we have to have some money in the tax stabilization fund to help with those ebbs and flows.
Gotcha. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about specifically the current expense note and that dollars, and that essentially that pushes forward a potential surplus next year that can become, I'm not saying it will, can become discretionary spending by the board. That's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Okay. And maybe if we could just get a little bit of history, Lisa, in the past, when we have had surpluses, I think traditionally those funds are just either left in the general fund or moved to tax stabilization. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And I am just going to make a comment, Terry, just because you had posed a question on Front Porch Forum earlier this week. So when we originally set, I think the most recent and the budget draft that was passed by the voters, we were looking at a projected surplus of about $800,000, I think. So that's why the Finance Committee and the board was comfortable in using the $600,000 in the tax stabilization fund, with the expectations that we may be able to put it back. It's only in the past few months, and as Lisa had mentioned, we didn't receive any of these COVID funds until March of this year. So the projected surplus has grown from about $800,000 in March, April, May to the $3.2 million now, and it was just unanticipated. We did not know we would be receiving that.
But you knew the number though, right? You did know.
We did not know the 3.2. No.
Okay.
And that's documented in each of our meeting. We get an update, with the projected surplus or deficit. So if you follow back all of the board meetings all the way back to the beginning of the year, you could track what we knew when we knew it.
Okay, but I still, if you want to talk about the Front Porch Forum post that I made, there wasn't a comment from anyone on the board saying that, hey, just so you know, taxpayers, also, we are anticipating getting some dollars here that will push this surplus bigger. Did anybody say that out to the public? No, you did not.
I think you can probably trace the Finance Committee meetings, because I specifically said that's the only way I was comfortable using up $600,000 of the tax stabilization fund.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's really a great resource if you can go onto the Barry Supervisory website and go to the board minutes. And there's also a drop down for the Finance Committee. And Andrea takes amazing minutes. And that's a lot of, that's where sometimes, I'll refer when I'm looking for information. But that's a really good resource for folks.
Sure, but unfortunately, all the residents in the town don't have time to read all those minutes. Sorry. So you should be putting out information in short bulleted information that people can look at and digest and have a clue.
Okay. Jamie, you've been waiting patiently.
I just going to make just a quick general comment. I'm a little puzzled why the community is puzzled about the surplus. And I'm going to dare say, I'm not Lisa, but I'm going to dare say the reason we have a surplus is because of COVID. If I could just simply make a simple statement, the reason we have a surplus is because of COVID. The COVID funds offsetted what we normally would have spent out of a regular operating budget. We didn't pay for all the things that Lisa mentioned. Just speaking from facilities, we didn't pay for rubbish removal and composting and recycling. A lot less heat, a lot less electricity. We burn a lot less oil, propane, wood chips, all the normal things we would be spending in a normal world of a school world. Just speaking from a facility standpoint, we spent a lot less. So that, along with all the instructional expenses and faculty and staff, I'm going to simplify it, but that's why we have a surplus, because COVID paid for things that we didn't have to pay for out of our normal operating budget. I don't know why that seems very foggy for people to grasp and understand. And I don't mean that in a demeaning way. Some people, I don't know if they're choosing not to understand it or don't believe it, but it is that simple. We have a surplus because we had COVID monies that paid for things that we normally would have paid for out of our budget. So that's my comment.
Thank you. And Josh?
Yeah, back to the tax stabilization fund. I'm glad that we used it, but the reason I don't like that fund at all is because it's a one-time shot. It's an easy way to increase a budget without increasing a budget, just by using that up. And every time you have money in a tax stabilization fund, if you're going through negotiations, if anyone's actually looking to renegotiate a contract, that's money on the table. They're going to look at that. Any money that's in there, they're going to say, hey, I can definitely ask for more. We can definitely get more because you just use this. It's an excuse, and it's no good. It helps you guys avoid hard decisions as far as what to cut. I'd like to see the Finance Committee and the board as a whole move forward and actually work harder to make these cuts. So you come out even at the end of the year. You shouldn't have a surplus on any year. I understand this year you had some COVID money, had this and that. I've heard all kinds of excuses where it came from. But yeah, definitely not the tax leaders one. It's just a lazy way out of it.
Josh, I can appreciate your comment, but I will say I kind of take offense at the fact that we're being lazy. You know, school budgets, school finance is pretty complex. You know, we're setting a budget for the following year during the current year, not knowing what our student enrollment will be, not knowing what the funding we will get from the state is, you know, so we have a lot of information, but it's never finalized until we actually receive it. So the idea that we would be able to level fund a budget and come out at zero at year end is just impractical.
But that should be the goal every time, when you think, try to get as equal as possible.
That is our goal.
You don't want to plan for a surplus. And 3.2 million, and you said back in March it was 800,000. Well, this budget didn't get approved till what was it, end of May, early June. I mean, we would have seen something. This is not like, you know, $800,000 turned to $820,000. It turned to 3.2 million. This
budget, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. This budget for the FY21 was approved last year. The budget that we just approved is for next year. So the 3.2 million, no, we did not anticipate that. That budget was begun in August of 2019.
So why did we know about it by June this year, that there's a big surplus?
Okay. You know, Lisa's kind of already gone over that, and I'm not going to go over it again. I appreciate the discussion that's been had around this, but to get the committee back on track, what we're looking at is whether or not we're going to recommend that we follow the superintendent's recommendation to the board. I understand there's a lot of feelings and opinions on that. If we go back to the recommendation, Chris has suggested we use 1.1 million to go to the capital projects fund. Jamie has prioritized the SHS sprinkler system. While, you know, as Paul had mentioned, I'm sure there's a lot of other projects that could be spent, you know, we could be spending money on. In cases like this, we're not working in the schools. We kind of need to defer to Jamie, as he is, you know, the building and facilities manager. As far as whether or not the board has the legal authority to do that, we're not lawyers, so we have to refer to the legal opinions that we received and the auditor's opinions. So at this time, I'm going to ask my committee members if we have a motion to move forward with the recommendation. Or Andrea's gonna she's gonna make a comment.
No, just a quick question, because the surplus has increased some, would this recommendation change at all before you make any type of motion?
All right, I'm going to defer that to Chris. So as Andrea mentioned, your recommendation that was proposed at the last board meeting was for 2.9 million. The projected surplus at this point in time is 3.2. Would that change anything that you've listed here?
The only thing that would change is if Jamie and the facilities team had anything else that they would want to add to their proposal. So that would be it. In terms of my recommendation.
Okay, and just to clarify, is even if we have a $3.2 million surplus and we take the superintendent's recommendation for 2.9 of it, that means that an additional 300,000 would remain in the general fund. Is that correct?
That is right.
Okay. Oh, and Gina's back. So based upon this, Gina, just to kind of catch you up, I was just looking for the committees, whether or not anyone wanted to make a motion to proceed with the superintendent's recommendation and have the finance committee recommend that the board utilize the surplus funds for those purposes.
I'll make the motion.
Okay. Renee or Chris, second? No? Okay, Chris is saying yes. All right, well.
I'll second the motion, sure.
Okay. So the motion's been made to adopt the superintendent's recommendation. Chris has seconded it, but Renee looks like she is not in favor. Do you want to discuss before we formally vote?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel really strongly that we need to make sure the safety of our kids is number one. And so I'm okay with allocating funds to get the sprinklers going. Because it is a unique year, and it's a surplus that we've never seen before, I'm hesitant to allocate the rest. I'm hearing what folks are saying, and I want to be able to be as responsive as we can be and listen as much as we can. And so if it's going to, a capital fund, like, yes, we need it. We've got 1,000 projects we could use it for. But because it's such a unique situation in so many ways, I think it's important to hear what folks think. Again, the safety of kids is number one to me. And so sprinklers, I'm totally okay with allocating that, but the rest of it,
Okay.
I would like to get more input on what folks are thinking.
Okay. Gina, Chris, do we want to amend the motion to, can we take half his recommendation? Jamie, do you have a comment?
Well, I think I heard it briefly mentioned whether we're going to put 1 million of it or all 3.2 million into a capital reserve. So if you ask me, well, Jamie, are there other things that we can do if we put all of it in there? With no hesitation, yes, there's plenty that we can do. We need to finish replacing the roof at Berry City. There's some more roofing to do at Berry Town. Berry City's parking lot driveways are pretty much had it. They need to be replaced. I have no problem finding where to put it and put it wisely and efficiently. I always say, we take care of the buildings will take care of us. So I have no hesitation in saying that we could use it and use all of it and then some. So if that helps to make the decision, we can use this money very wisely, in our buildings, if that helps.
Okay. Chris?
Thanks. Two quick things. One, I think I let the board know this at our retreat last week, but one of the big red flags that I've been hearing from superintendents around the state since I've come into this role is that one of the big factors impacting all of our work around the state is the condition of the facilities throughout Vermont, school facilities. In that regard, because of the work that this community is doing on our facilities for decades, but especially in the last 10 years, our buildings are actually in really good condition. And it's because of kind of what Jamie's talked about, staying on top of this, that we are actually in a lot better shape than a lot of school districts are right now all around Vermont, just comparatively. The other piece, just in terms of process here, as I understand it, this committee is making a recommendation to the board, and then discussion can continue. Yes, so this doesn't end this. I know Josh and Terry and others are still concerned about community forums, and I don't think anybody's here saying that we don't want to have these. So it's just a matter of this being part of this process. It continues when we have our board meeting next week and beyond. So I just want to point that out.
Okay. Andrew?
Okay, I'm here. Yeah, another thing I think to note, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong. When you make a recommendation and say the board approves it to move 1.1 million to the capital projects fund, that does not lock you into the sprinkler system. Just like when the budget is passed every year, even though there is a breakdown and people can look at the line items, monies aren't necessarily spent exactly as they are in the budget, and administrators and the board work to spend the money the way they need to. So even if you said we have, say, 2 million for salaries, if you're not spending 2 million on salaries, or you found that you needed 100,000 for something else and didn't need it, it gets moved. The voters aren't approving the line items. The voters are approving the amount.
That's correct. And when we suggested the 1.1 be assigned to capital project funds or the sprinkler project, it's not moving it anywhere. We're going to keep it in the general fund and assign it, and it would be an assigned general fund amount, and then the rest would be unassigned. So we're not moving money into reserves, or we're not doing any of that. We're just suggesting that you identify, based on the fact that you have so much in surplus, that you identify what you think you'd like to do with it. And then the board will determine, yes, we want to assign it here, or we want to ask the voters to move this into our capital reserve, capital project funds. So, that's what we're doing. And the fact that we just have so much money, it's good to start talking about it.
Okay.
I missed all the conversation and I apologize, and I'm not going to make us rehash it. I can amend my motion to say that I move that we recommend, it sounds like we're all fairly aligned on the sprinkler project. We recommend that we allocate that money to the sprinkler project and hold off on the remaining allocation. I don't know if there was a discussion about tax stabilization. I don't necessarily want to have it now or make you repeat it, but I do think that on the board side, that is our mechanism for essentially returning money to the taxpayers. So I think that once we have the audited balance, that it would be worth a more robust discussion about how much that we want to allocate there. Because my perspective on it is that's my perspective. So I'm comfortable amending my motion to that, if that works in Andrea's world. It probably does. Like, she's raised her hand. What I do wrong?
Well, I don't know as you can actually allocate it to a project.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
If that makes sense, you can allocate it, I believe, to the capital projects fund.
To a project without taking it to the voters, right? If we wanted to be done with something specific, let's not come.
Right, and it would just be assigned. You wouldn't have to. I mean, in the board meeting, you would be clear what you assigned that part of the general fund to. But
I mean, it sounds like we have some time. I don't know. We've certainly done public surveys before. I don't know if we want to go down the road of putting together a survey that goes out over the next 3 or 4 weeks to ask the public what they think we should do with the funds and solicit their opinions, so that, we may end up in the same place that we are right now, but we can, I deal with some of the community fears about us not, listening to any public input. And that could be a little, it could actually reach more people than a community forum. And we would actually have, data on paper about public opinion. So if we've got time, that's an option that could maybe fulfill all of those needs.
Okay. So Gina, are you amending your motion or pulling it?
Oh, well, I hate to be difficult, Sarah, but I guess I'm pulling it. I mean, I guess,
Okay.
We have a lot of disagreements about, what we're going to do with money and how the board handles it and how responsible that we're being. And, I don't know that we're ever going to resolve those disagreements, but it seems like we can take some pretty simple steps to at least be able to say with confidence, we have solicited feedback and heard from all of the affected parties. These are our decisions in light of that. And so I guess I'm taking back my motion and saying if we can table it until we've had time to gather some more information, that I would think that could serve us in the long run in terms of helping to alleviate the argument that we're not behaving responsibly.
Okay.
So I just want to clarify, are we going to make a motion that we're recommending to the board that they conduct a survey prior to making a decision? Or are you just going to fill in the board on, unofficially on that the committee did not reach a consensus and you think additional information is required?
I think we're probably going that route, Andrea. I think we're not going to necessarily make a recommendation to the board at this time. I'll give an update as to what was discussed at the board meeting, but it sounds like, you know, we're going to be soliciting some input from more stakeholders here.
And Sarah, can I just add that this discussion about community forums, we agreed we were going to be continuing this. So that is still,
Correct.
I don't think we're in a position here tonight to say, oh, we'll do it this way for this topic. There's still a lot of discussion that has to happen around that to do it well.
Sure. Okay. Well, I appreciate the input and, you know, the background information on all of that. If there's nothing else, we can move on to item 5.4, which is a review of the unaudited FY21 year-end projections. Lisa, we don't really have to go over this. As we discussed, you know, primarily because of COVID, we are at a projected surplus right now of about $3.2 million. You know, at page 1, about midway through your packet, you can look, and Lisa has done a narrative line by line of the primary variances. However, most of them are related to COVID and additional savings. Any questions on that? No, okay. Because I so often skip, she also included the Career Center projected year-end projections. It looks like they've got a very small deficit of about 20,000.
Correct. And we haven't closed our books, so we still have some minor closing entries and some revenues coming in still. So, you know, right now it's a negative 19,000. They did have a fund balance in June 30, 2020 of 180,000. So, you know, certainly they have money to cover that.
Okay. Any questions about that? No. Okay. Moving on to item 5.5, financial procedure review. It looks like Lisa has included the purchasing procedure. I feel like we've already seen this.
Right. You
Oh,
have.
it was revised.
We talked about this, I believe, at the June meeting.
Yep.
And because the bid law has changed, it was for expenses over 15,000, the board had to approve. The new law on the back of the purchasing procedure has increased that 15,000 to 40,000. And so I wanted to share a draft updated purchasing procedure, but in order to change the procedure, we also need the policy committee to review and make a change to their fiscal management and general financial accountability, because that policy speaks to expenditures in excess of 15,000 must be approved by the board.
Okay, so Chris, we're punting this one to you. It looks like it's policy F20, and it references the VSA statute that's been changed. And I know you're right. I'm sorry. We did discuss this at the last meeting about how the law had changed. So we have the jurisdiction to change the policy if we so choose. I think there was some discussion about that, and I know it would make Jamie's life easier in some instances if it didn't have to go there. But there was a discussion about, even though we can change it, we don't necessarily have to. So perhaps some discussion around that. Gina, did you have a question?
I just have a comment. I've said this in several different meetings, and so I apologize for being repetitive. But Chris, when you're looking at this policy, I'm just skipping it, and I haven't read it quickly. I think there should be a mechanism in there for when a project what happens if the project goes above 40,000 while it's in process. And that number, you're talking about big projects. I mean, construction stuff, whatever stuff can go over estimate all the time. And so I think we should just have some kind of function in there for what happens if something sort of starts in the place where it doesn't need board notification and multiple bids and then moves into the place where it does.
Thank you. Jamie?
Yeah, so what Gina just posed that question. In my years of doing this, very rarely, has that happened that it's gone above what was quoted. But just last year, it did go above a bit when we did the driveway project at Berry City Elementary. If and when that does, I make Lisa aware. I believe Lisa made, the school board aware that, there was that unexpected, expense. And without boring you with it, it was, we found a bunch of unsuitable material underground that had to be removed. So it was a very warranted expense. But yes, it did put it over. So I'm just going to put my plug in to say that, to go from 15,000 to 40,000, that might be a bit sticker shock for some folks. Might think, wow, that's an awful lot of money for Jamie to be able to spend without, board approval. But anybody that's in any kind of, construction, background or just, familiar with it a bit, 40,000, and I don't say this carelessly, it's not really a lot of money when you factor in projects when it comes to material and labor. The general rule of thumb is usually, about half and half. A $40,000 project, about half is labor, the other half is material. $20,000 in material on a construction, site is not a whole lot of money. And yes, it really, really slows me down, getting these projects done. So, for my sake, I certainly would want to put the plug in that, hopefully we would allow, giving me the ability to do a project, up to 40,000. Anytime I start reaching that limit, even when it was 15, I would generally seek out, 2 to 3 bids, even though it was under 15, just to do my due diligence and show that, we are being wise with the money. Lisa would confer with that. But then obviously, anything over 15, we always would seek out at least the 3 bids. So again, putting my plug in, I would hope that it would be raised to 40,000 because it would save a lot of time and money has always been spent wisely. So it wouldn't be spent unwisely.
Sure, thank you. And I'm assuming, all the reasons you stated are probably the reasons that the law was changed in the first place, but Gina?
Yeah, Jamie, just to clarify, I wasn't saying that thinking that you would be trying to take advantage of it. I know that you handle your projects responsibly. I think that it is something that contractors could potentially take advantage of to get in with a bid right under 40 and then end up over 40. And I also think that, again, we are being hammered for how we're handling the budget and how responsible that we're being. And my concern is that if we have a bunch of projects that are in the $35,000 range, edging into 45, it makes us look like we're not paying attention, or we're just rubber stamping things without really getting all the information. I would prefer to take and I'm not saying that I think the number should be lower. I hear you, 40,000 when you're building something isn't a whole lot of money, but I would prefer to be more cautious in the first year in terms of notifications of any increases, just while we see how this plays out. And then, in future years, when we get more comfortable and build more confidence, perhaps in the community that the board's managing the budget well, dialing it back a little bit, but I'd rather play it safe for the time being.
And just for the sake of adding to that, what you said, when it was at the $15,000 level, contractors were very well aware of that $15,000 level as well. And that wasn't an issue. They didn't, try to bump it up another few thousand, 5,000 beyond that 15,000. A hard quote was a hard quote. Again, I only remember maybe that one time, again, referring to the Berry City driveway project that it had gone over. So for what it's worth, that was an issue before at the $15,000 level. And I certainly would hold to that again at whatever level we agree to. So.
Renee?
Yeah, I think I just want to reiterate what Gina was saying, that Jamie, I have full confidence in you and that you wouldn't spend $2 more than you needed to get things done to make sure that things are safe for kids. And I think that, there's 1,000 projects that could be done, and we could easily spend $5 million. And it would all be well spent stuff that needs to be done. And so I think that, I want to reiterate my confidence in you, Jamie, that I believe that everything that you're suggesting is things that needs to be done. And just that, again, because it's such a unique year and there's so much, and a lot of it is federal money. So it's, it's not necessarily budgeted and everything, but that we have to be conscious of what's going on. And so allocating, some of it makes a lot of sense to me, but again, I think the whole thing, I think we just have to be careful. Gina said it nice. I'm just following up.
Okay. All right. So sorry, Chris, we're giving you another policy to look at.
Yeah, so we have a number of things already coming up, I believe, at least at the next one, if not the next two meetings. So these will be parking lot, I guess, for now, and see when they can be added in.
Okay. Moving on. Item number 6, old business. I don't have anything. Any other business from anybody? No. Okay. Items for future agenda. Lisa, according to your schedule, we're not really going to be getting drafts of the budget for a little while. So I'm assuming that we will continue to be updated as the auditors work through FY21 and receive FY22 very early updates. Based upon how the ESSER fund, I don't know if any of that might get punted back to the finance committee to discuss or how that'll go, but I'm guessing that'll be discussed at the board level too. So I don't really have a lot of items for future agenda at this point.
I mean, Sarah, we'll at least have an update from the survey that Josh Allen and I sent out yesterday, and from obviously the results of the community forum and any other input we get there. So we will have that update.
Okay. Lisa, was there anything else? So I've got, the updates from the ESSER fund survey forum, FY21 results / audit, FY22. Anything else I'm missing?
Right. We could, the audit is scheduled.
It's not usually done December.
It's September. Well, they'll be here in September.
Okay.
But we could certainly, did you have FY22 on there?
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's it
Okay.
for now. If we think of something in the meantime, we can certainly add it.
Okay. Like I said, the full board might punt us some things too. So.
True.
Our next meeting. Sorry.
Before, I just want to clarify. So you're talking about an ESSER fund update, including, say, survey results. FY21 year-end projections again, if they're more finalized or no?
If there's any changes, yeah.
Okay, and I mean, you briefly discussed the audit, but is there anything, is that going to be an item for next month?
No, the audit will begin in September. They probably won't finalize it until later in September or October. And I don't know if that comes to the finance committee or goes straight to the board.
Yeah, they'll start in September. They'll come back in October, and by mid-November, we'll have a final document.
Okay.
And then you said something about FY22. I didn't catch what you were discussing about FY22.
Just looking at FY22 financials, it'll only be, July and August of activity really. So it honestly, the financial projections don't mean a whole lot in September, but we
Right,
put
it's
that on
too
the list.
early in the year. Okay, so we just have basically 3 things here. And then I did have one question
Sure.
that Lisa could answer, I think. Once your audit is completed and you have an audited surplus or deficit, more specifically a surplus, aren't there specific rules regarding once they're audited that how they have to be spent?
Once you have an audited surplus, the board can assign it to a reserve fund. So the capital projects funds or the tax stabilization fund. Or they can, bring it to the voters to at a board meeting. I mean, at a budget meeting.
A budget vote?
A budget vote.
Okay.
Right.
Just want to clarify. Next meeting date is set for September 7th, which is the first Tuesday in September, 5:30. Everybody's okay with that? Okay. In that case, unless there's something else, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
All right. All in favor? All right. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jamie.
I didn't catch who was moving and seconding.
Renee and Chris.
Okay, Renee and Chris, thank you.
Is that right?
It's all of us. Fine.
Okay. All right. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Jamie, for the background. Lisa for putting in
Thank you.
all the work. Chris.
I'm stopping recording, everybody. Have a good night.
All right. Have a good night.